Good morning, everyone. I'm Rabbi Joshua Davidson, and I am honored to welcome you in person and online to the second of 5 sessions of Israel on Our Minds, a series that gives you the chance to ask questions about the current situation in Israel and the fast-moving news coming from the Middle East with our good friend, Ambassador Ido Aharoni. Ambassador Aharoni will open with a brief update on the most recent news from Israel, and then he will take our questions, no matter where they may lead. But before we begin, especially in light of all that unfolded last week and this week, and the uncertainty of what is yet to come, I'd like to offer our tradition's prayer for the remaining hostages, one many of you know we've been reciting every Shabbat for more than a year, for those still captive in Gaza, for their families, and really for all of Israel, which cannot heal until the hostages return home, either to the arms of their loved ones or for burial in the soil of their homeland. And the prayer begins by noting that we Jews are all one family, wherever we live, achim, brethren. Achenu kol beit Yisrael, our family, the whole house of Israel, who are in distress or in captivity, who abide either on the sea or on dry land, may the all-present have mercy on them and take them out from narrowness to expanse, from darkness to light, from oppression to redemption, now, swiftly, and soon. Amen. And now, please welcome our good friend, Ambassador Ido Aharoni.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Such a pleasure to be back. And I know that I wasn't given all the questions that already came in. I don't have them with me, but I was told that the one question that dominates today is the question of why Israel voted with the United States at the UN the way they did on the issue of Russia-Ukraine. And the answer actually is very simple. It does require some historical background, which I'm happy to share. But the answer is very simple. And we better have more questions because this one is a very easy question to answer. Israel doesn't really have much of a choice when it comes to its relationship with the United States because we are a very small actor and we are, I would say, certainly militarily and diplomatically, we are relying on the United States almost 100% of the time. In the United Nations specifically, without the United States, Israel is a sitting duck, meaning any country can, and they have, as they have, passed resolutions that make no sense, like Zionism equals racism of 1975 and so on. So historically, there are two processes that we should mention to explain how we ended up here, that Israel has really no maneuverability, no degree of independence in the international arena when it comes to the United States. The first is what happened to the UN. The United Nations was born out of World War II. Before that, if you remember, the previous forum was called the League of Nations that operated between World War I to World War II. Didn't really do much. The United States did not participate in the League of Nations, which was really the kiss of death of that attempt. But multilateral diplomacy that emerged after World War II as a result of the trauma of World War II was a sign of the new Western liberal order of the world. And the idea was to put the individual at the center, to protect the individual. That's why when you look at the UN Charter, it's a very, very progressive document that was written in 1945 in San Francisco. And it was all about human rights, and human rights became almost a new religion, if you may. But when the UN was established, there were only 51 members. And it slowly grew and grew. The United Nations that accepted Israel's, the partition plan in November 1947, already had 55 members. And then it grew and grew and grew, and today you have 193 members out of approximately 220 nations in the world, so that's the majority of the countries in the world. And there is a clear majority among the 193 members to non-democracies, not to mention tyrannies. So if you intend to challenge what was until Trump 47, what was led by the United States as the liberal world order and the American spheres of influence, if you oppose that, you have a built-in majority in the United Nations. So the United Nations could pass resolutions left and right, General Assembly resolutions, not Security Council, obviously, because in the Security Council, the United States has a veto power. And the Russians also have veto power, which also basically neutralizes the Security Council. But in the General Assembly, lots of things that did not make any sense, that undermined the position of the United Nations as a multilateral diplomatic arena. For example, to let Syria of Assad, the father, to be the head of the Human Rights Commission, or to let Libya, Gaddafi's Libya, to be the head of the Human Rights Commission, to launch close to 30 investigations on human rights violations that Israel allegedly committed, without even one on Sudan and Darfur. Just to let you, just to give you the background, in Darfur, hundreds of thousands of people died by a Sudanese-backed terrorist group that really, talking about genocide, really committed genocide in Darfur. So close to 30 investigations on Israel and Gaza, and none on Sudan. That's the United Nations. And I can go on and on and on and give you examples. And I believe that in many ways, the new world order, the Trump 47, which is really unfolding in front of our eyes, is trying to establish, is to really undermine all those institutions that, to use his words, lost any common sense. And the United Nations is one of them. So that's one explanation to what you've seen. And we can talk about, bottom line, in the UN, Israel without the United States is worthless. We really don't have any other choice. And whatever the United States will vote, we will vote with the United States. That's the rule. And then comes the other question of why, why and how Israel decided to bet on America. And remember, the year is 1945, 3 years before Israel becomes independent. Israel becomes independent as a result of the British decision to end the British mandate over Palestine. And David Ben-Gurion knows that once he will proclaim independence, a military confrontation with the Arabs is inevitable. But remember, in 1948, and he has the time to prepare from the end of November until the end of the mandate, which is mid-May. So he has about 5.5 months to prepare an army. During those 5.5 months, he is realizing that he will not be receiving any institutional aid from any world power. Not the United States, certainly not the Soviet Union, certainly not the British Empire, they are leaving. Not the French assistance will become instrumental about a decade later. The only people it could rely on were diaspora Jews. And indeed, not far from here, on this avenue, a secretive operation of the Haganah is raising money here in New York to buy arms illegally. They're shipping the arms from Long Island City through Europe. Volunteers are being recruited here, about 3,000 of them. The most famous of them was, of course, Mickey Marcus. Mickey Marcus David Mickey Marcus was born in Queens, was a judge, was a graduate of West Point, 1924. And he was asked, along 26 other high-ranking Jewish officers from all of the Allied forces that participated in World War II, he was asked by Ben-Gurion personally to come and help him build an army. Of all the 26, only one said yes, and that was Mickey Marcus. And he showed up, and he really spent a lot of time with Ben-Gurion, and he taught him how to build an army. And remember, no one was supporting this army. When David Ben-Gurion was contemplating the creation of the Israel Defense Forces, remember, he had no Navy, he had no Air Force, he had no Armored Corps. All he had was a bunch of people, not very well trained, but highly motivated. And then the refugees came in. Most of them didn't even speak Hebrew. One of the reasons, we're told by historians that one of the reasons for the tragic accident that claimed the life of Mickey Marcus is the fact it was miscommunications. He didn't speak Hebrew, and the guard that night did not speak English, and he shot him and he killed him, and the rest is history, as you know. If you had a chance to see the movie Cast a Giant Shadow, it tells the story of Mickey Marcus. So why am I telling all of this? Because somewhere in the early 1950s, mid-1950s, while in the Israeli government there's a big, in the Israeli political system in general, there's a big debate. Many of the influential former military generals that went into politics, that were part of the socialist, and again, I don't want you to use current American political terminology to understand the positions of those parties in the 1950s. They were socialists, but they were not liberal. Don't make that mistake. They were highly conservative. And when it came to the Arabs, they were hawks, all of them, but they were socialists. I know that because my father was one of them. So that wing of the labor movement actually supported alignment with the Soviets. They believed that the Soviets got it right. And remember, this was not the world of today with the degree of transparency so high and you can really know what's happening in Russia today. But back in the day, you know, they, as you say today, they drank the Kool-Aid. They really believed all the things that Stalin was telling the world. And then the other group was more of a Western orientation. So Ben-Gurion gradually made that transition. First, by taking Israel out of the Communist International, which was there were two different multilateral organizations to celebrate socialism. One was the European International, which Israel stayed in until, I believe, the 1990s. But the communist one, Ben-Gurion took Israel out of that gathering, signaling the Americans that he's not betting on the Soviets. To the best of my knowledge, the decision to side with the United States was his own decision. So there was we don't have any protocols of any discussions that took place. And the question is why? Why Ben-Gurion decided that Israel should bet on America in the Cold War? And I think it has several explanations. The first is he experienced as a young man the cruelty and the brutality of Tsarist Russia. Secondly, he experienced New York as a young man. He was here. He came to New York for romance. He was courting his wife, Paula Munvez, who was not even a Zionist back in the day. Right? She was a socialist, a radical. He called her himself. He used the word radical to describe her. And she didn't want to go to Palestine. But they got married here in the City Hall in New York in 1918, I believe. And in 1919 or 1920, they both go to Palestine. And when she died, he asked that it will be inscribed on her grave his appreciation for the fact that she came with him to the desert, literally to the desert, despite her, the fact that she had other plans. So Ben-Gurion makes the decision to bet on the United States. We don't have an official defense agreement, an official alignment, but it's unofficial. And the relationship have many layers, which I'm happy to discuss today. But this is the price that we have to pay, right? So we have to purchase arms from the United States. We're not allowed to do several, major things with other competitors, like we can't deal with China, we can't deal with other actors. We are committed. It's a committed relationship, if you may. and very asymmetric. It's not that Israel is independent to do whatever we want. Maybe Israeli politicians would like you to think that way, but this is far from being, this is far from reality. In reality, we can't really do much without the United States. The best example was when we ran out of munitions, when we ran out of spare parts for our airplanes. Obviously, our dependence on the United States, on the Biden administration at the time, was a big factor in the decision how to calculate what we call our munition economy. So this is a long answer to a very short question as to why Israel voted the way it did. And the answer is we made that commitment to side with the United States back in the 1950s. And this is one of the things that we have to do, is to support the United States wherever we are. By the way, another great example was in 1991, which Bush the father was the president. If you remember, in August of 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. So one member of the Arab League invaded another member of the Arab League. And the United States administration brilliantly got the United Nations Security Council to work and basically had a mandate backed by the UN to release Kuwait, to free Kuwait. That was the mandate of the US-led coalition. That coalition was a brilliant masterpiece in diplomacy because they were able to bring into this coalition, with the exception, of course, of the Palestinians, as Golda said, never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They sided with Saddam Hussein. But in the coalition that Bush put together, you had Assad, Syria, Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia. So it was a masterpiece of international diplomacy. And then Saddam, from his perspective, when you think about it logically, makes perfect sense. He thought to himself, how am I going to break this coalition? And he said, Israel is the weakest link. So therefore, I should attack the Israelis. The Israelis will respond, obviously, because I'm going to attack Israeli cities. And Israelis will respond for sure. This is their national ethos, never again. They will respond. And that will bring down the coalition. Because once Israel will respond, Syria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the whole thing will fall apart. And that's exactly what he did. He attacked Israel with 39 Scud missiles. I was living in Tel Aviv at the time. I remember that very well. And the damage was not so much because of the Scuds. It was more because of the Patriots. It's a long story. I'll tell you later. But there was a lot of property damage. I think one person lost his life. One person was killed when a wall fell on him in the neighborhood of Ramat Chen, which is part of Ramat Gan. And Israel was adamant that the response is going to be harsh. Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir wanted to attack. And the Americans said, no, you're not going to attack. And guess what happened? We did not attack. Right? Same thing happened now with the humanitarian aid to Gaza. We can talk about that too. But that was the answer to that question. Now I'm told that we have more questions coming in. Thank you. All right, so it's the first time I'm seeing them. Aaron is asking, do you see a possibility of improving the public relations communications by the Israeli government to more precisely present a persuasive message about the virtues and essential sustenance of Israel? Well, this question implies that the Israeli government is not doing that right now. Well, I'm not sure that this is the case. Let me just say, in general terms, the problem that Israel is facing when it comes to reputation is what I call one of positioning. Positioning is the policies, the actions that a government implements and announces in order to improve its position vis-a-vis its competitors. That's positioning. Where do you stand as opposed to your competition. So first we need to define Israel's competitive cluster. Do we really think that Israel's competition are the Palestinians or Hamas? I would argue that that's the first conceptual failure on Israel's part and Israel's well-wishers. Israel's competition is not the Palestinians. It'd be the wrong way to think about the world. Not even when it comes to reputation. People that love Israel cringe when they see, those Israeli officials interviewed, and some of them lose control on air, and it's really embarrassing to see. And they tend to praise the other side. Why the Palestinians are so brilliant? Are they? Are they that brilliant? Really? Do you think so? I don't think so. I think the Palestinians are the worst in their PR. Think about what Hamas did. What did Hamas do? What was the purpose of it? Who is doing what they did, pre-civilizational behavior, and then gleefully and enthusiastically uploading it on Facebook, live? To what end? What were they hoping to achieve? Sympathy in the world? The reality is the Palestinians are disliked throughout the world, in particular the Arab world. Nobody likes them, nobody wants them, nobody wants to work with them. Right? Israel missed a golden opportunity in Camp David to give Gaza to the Egyptians. Menachem Begin insisted on keeping Gaza in our hands. But when you think about the Palestinians, particularly Hamas, even here, 84% of the Americans put the blame squarely on Hamas, support Israel's right to defend itself. Over 80% of the students on campus oppose the encampments. They find it alienating, right? So they're not doing such a great job. In fact, they're doing a lousy job. Foolish. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Whoever is funding the protest on campus, which I believe are certainly funded by one central entity, because you see the equipment is identical, the tents are identical, everything comes from one main source. Whoever is doing it has no idea, doesn't even begin to understand public relations. Effective public relations is designed to create emotional connection. It's designed to create some sort of loyalty, affiliation. In this case, exactly the opposite. Fear, alienation. The students that broke into the Columbia yesterday and a few weeks ago into a class that my friend was teaching at Columbia, what were they trying to achieve? To scare people? Okay, they managed to scare them. That doesn't create the emotional connection. So this is not to say that Israel is doing a brilliant job, but this is to say that Israel suffers from a built-in disadvantage that we have to understand. We're not being viewed as the underdog. We were the underdog until 1982. In 1982, we invaded Lebanon. We changed the paradigm. We became, for the first time, the regional Goliath rather than the regional David. We also exported our own internal division around the Sabra and Shatila massacre to you, especially in the American Jewish community. And so voices, for the first time, voices in the organized American Jewry started to debate. So there was an open debate in favor and against the war in Lebanon. Until the war in Lebanon, Israel was clearly the underdog. And then since 1982, it's been downhill. We had this first intifada and the second intifada, and Israel was always the side that had the might, that had the numbers, that had the weapons, and the Palestinians were always the underdog. And you have a whole generation of academics that were taught that if you're the underdog, by definition, you are right, and you're never accountable, And there are people that believe that in America. They believe that because this is all part of identity politics. This is all part of why Trump is back in the White House. Because people were fed up with this nonsense. With this nonsense that, if I'm a member of any minority group, I'm not accountable. I can do whatever I want. I'm not accountable. Last month we spoke about it here, about how prominent figures in the African American community truly express racist views against Israel, and they don't see themselves as racists, only because they think that because of their identity, they cannot be possibly racist. Well, they can, and they are. And that nonsense is what brought Trump to the White House again. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. Now, I don't know if the war that he declared against, the DI bureaucracy is going to be successful or not. I'm not sure he's doing it the right way. There's a basic logic that works there in the creation of those mechanisms, but of course they took it too far. They took it too far, and now they're paying the price. So the answer to the question, if I see a possibility of Israel improving its positioning, reputation, I don't think it's going to happen with this government. This government doesn't prioritize reputation. They don't see it as part of national security. I don't think it's going to happen with this current coalition. But in the future, in order for this to happen, in order for Israel to have a well-concentrated effort orchestrated by the government, they will have to put in billions of dollars to fix the positioning problem that I was just describing to you, because it's up against decades of academic indoctrination, not just against Israel, against the West, against the United States. You have here in the United States elite universities that are teaching their students that your country, America, is the source of all evil, and Israel is only the collateral damage. And that's what's happening in many of the universities. Believe me, I teach there. I know what I'm talking about. They are being taught that America is the source of all evil in certain departments, not all of them. And so the system is broken. The administration is too weak to do something. You have the tenured professor that keep on appointing like-minded professors, and the problem only perpetuates. And I don't see any solution in sight to that problem. Second question. Steve asks, why does Trump get so much credit for the Abraham Accords? Wasn't it just formalizing what was already a reality? Well, it's true that the Abraham Accords became formal, and there was a lot going on between Israelis and Emiratis and Israelis and Bahrainis and Israelis and Saudis way before, decades before. It's all true, but nevertheless, he deserves credit for creating the framework. And also remember that the Abraham Accords is not just UAE and Bahrain, it's also Morocco and Sudan. And Morocco is critically important to the understanding of what's happening in North Africa. Also, remember that 3 weeks before the signing of the Abraham Accords, it was Israel's government that wanted to annex the West Bank. And so Trump was able to overcome that internal political hurdle. So he certainly deserves a lot of credit for the Abraham Accords. Now, you may ask a question, why Israel had to sign a peace treaty with 4 countries that we don't have any border with, right? We don't have any border with Morocco, Sudan, Bahrain, or the United Arab Emirates. We've never been in any military confrontation with them. Well, maybe there was a Sudanese contingent force, participating in 1948, or in 73. So why do we have to sign a peace treaty with countries we've never had war with? And the answer is because in 1945, the Arab economic boycott, which was imposed on us by the Arab League, was an act of war. And the Arab economic boycott is still in effect. So we have legally to sign peace treaties with those who try to destroy us economically. And all the Arab countries were part of that. So that's the answer to the question why we have to sign a peace treaty. The Abraham Accords, amazingly, still hold, despite all the images that came out of Gaza. They were very difficult for many Arabs to watch, and rightly so. Harsh images. So were the images on the Israeli side. But they still hold. And the reason is because they reflect a real self-interest on the part of the Arabs and self-interest on the part of Israel. And that's what we call in diplomacy the compatibility of self-interests. When the self-interests of the two sides are compatible, that's the bingo moment in diplomacy. And I believe that the same thing will happen sooner than later with the Saudis. So that's it in terms of the questions that came in so far. Let me go to the floor. Yeah, so you all heard the question, what's going to happen with the Haredi exemption from military service, and is it related to the budget? Yeah, so in Israel, Israeli politics, everything is related to everything, right? So yes, it is related to the budget. I don't see how they reach a compromise on this issue because so we have, it's very difficult to generalize, everything that has with religiosity in Israel is very difficult to generalize. But we have, by and large, and forgive me for generalizing, two religious groups in Israel, okay? This is way more than two, but I'm just for the sake of this explanation. So you have what we call the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, and then we have what we call the nationalist Orthodox, the Datim Leumim, right? One group is extremely Zionistic, and their participation in the military is way above average. The other group is not so Zionistic. There's a little bit of Zionism there, but the core isn't Zionistic. And they don't participate, their participation is marginal in the military. Now, the current coalition is dependent. These are the two main pillars of this coalition. Now, because there is a conflict, a built-in conflict between the first group and the second, I believe that this issue will bring down the government. That's my belief. This issue will bring down the government because the government won't be able to, the religious nationalists, that many of them are settlers, but not only the settlers. They will not tolerate any deal that will allow the Haredi to continue with this exemption. Now, for the sake of historical accuracy, a lot of people blame Ben-Gurion, poor Ben-Gurion, for that. But the real problem started under Begin, not under Ben-Gurion. Begin was the first in 1977 to let the Haredi run the finance committee in the Knesset. And that's when the really corrupt relationship between the Haredi bureaucracy and the Israeli budget began. It was under Menachem Begin. When Ben-Gurion gave the exemption, there were only 400 Haredi students that were labeled as Iluim. They were geniuses, and they needed to study. And Ben-Gurion, who himself was a yeshiva boy, he studied in the Cheder, he had an emotional connection to that experience. He himself was a genius, by the way. So a lot of people blame Ben-Gurion for what's happening, but the truth is that it really started to get out of control under Menachem Begin. That's the historical truth. Yes, please. You wanted to ask a question. Yeah. So if I were you, I wouldn't buy into all those tactical explanations that Israeli politicians are expert in providing the public. Just remember this. The war between us and the Arabs, later on the Palestinians, started over a century ago. And there's no end in sight, sadly. I say this very, very sadly. There's no end in sight. Israel will continue to operate in Gaza and in the West Bank. We did it before the hostages, and we'll do it after the hostages are back. So all the rest are excuses that politicians are using. What we should have done, and I said it here before, and now I'm glad to see that there were other people in Israel that were saying it in real time. What we should have done on 10/7, maybe October 8th, is propose to understand, first of all, that we were defeated, which we refused to accept. We were defeated on October 7th. And then the only deal that we should have considered was to say this is a crisis about hostages first. And let's release all the hostages for all the Palestinian prisoners. All for all. That was the only deal that made sense. And I said it already on October 8th. Why? Because it would have taken, first of all, the world would have been on Israel's side. This is before Israel took any military action. Second, it would have shifted all the pressure to the Palestinians. And if they had said no, Israel could have gone ahead with the military action. And if they had said yes, then they would have lost their only leverage. So now, they will eventually complete the deal. And the reason why they will complete the deal, I'll tell you the reason. What is the leverage that Trump has over them that Biden did not have? The humanitarian aid. I say humanitarian, so-called humanitarian, because they take it all for themselves, the Hamas operatives. Very, very little aid actually ends up in the hands of rank-and-file Gazans. We know that. The Biden administration had an expectation that Israel will fight the enemy, but at the same time help the enemy. Well, if you fight a war, let me ask you, did the Allied forces in World War II were fighting the Nazi party alone, or they were fighting Germany? They were fighting Germany. And many uninvolved, innocent Germans paid the price. And so the expectation that Israel will fight Gaza, not Hamas. Gaza, that's the root cause for the confusion that exists today in the public discourse. The war is not against Hamas. The war is against a rogue entity called Gaza. It's a political entity controlled by Hamas. Have you seen any leading Muslim clergy in Gaza condemning 10/7? Have you seen any imam in the West Bank condemning 10/7? Have you heard any imam anywhere condemning 10/7? Probably not. Right? That's what Israel is fighting. Israel's not just fighting Hamas. Israel is fighting an entire entity of 2 million people that supports what happened, the atrocities in 10/7. Have you heard of any righteous person saving Israeli hostages on 10/7? There were righteous people in Germany. There were righteous people in Poland. Not in Gaza. We have not heard one story of a righteous Palestinian who secretly helped a Jewish girl that was abducted. We have not heard those stories, right? And I wish we had, by the way. Really, I wish we had heard those stories, because it would have made it more difficult for us to simplify the picture. It's important for us to understand complexities. But no, unfortunately not. That's not what happened. So when we talk about, the war, it's important to understand that the leverage that Donald Trump has on Hamas is the knowledge that Hamas has, that he will not hesitate to, as we say, shut off turn off the shelter, turn off electricity, no water, no electricity, no medication, no food. He will have no problem doing that. They know that. And that's the leverage he has over Hamas. Not the fact that Israel will continue with the military action. So once the hostage deal is implemented, Israel can always go back to continue with the military action. I don't think it's a problem. And in fact, more and more Israelis today realize that the problem was that since 2009 until 2023, we did not respond harshly enough to the military provocations that came out of Gaza or out of Lebanon. When Ehud Olmert entered the Prime Minister's office in the summer of 2006, Hezbollah decided to test him. And they launched an attack along the border in the north, and they killed and abducted a couple of soldiers, and they thought that this was painful to the Israelis, but not painful enough for them to go crazy. But Olmert did go crazy on them. And Israel's response was extremely harsh. Not only a ground invasion, but the entire neighborhood where Hezbollah personnel lived in the northern in Beirut, called the Dahya quarter, was completely leveled by the Israeli Air Force. And Nasrallah kept quiet for 15 years after that, right? And many Israelis today will tell you that we should have done that to the Palestinians in Gaza. In fact, Avigdor Lieberman, who was the Minister of Defense, resigned over what he believed was Israeli reluctance to act harshly whenever the Gazans are provoking Israel. Yeah, so it's not that I don't think there's going to be a Palestinian state. It's not about that. It's about how do you define the form of Palestinian self-rule, right? That's the question. Because we do know that Israelis don't trust the Palestinians, certainly not after 10/7, but at the same time, Israelis don't want to rule their lives. Ruling the lives of millions of Palestinians, many of them are radical, is a recipe for disaster. It will drain Israeli resources, many soldiers will die, and this is not what the Israelis want. We've been there before. That's why we left Gaza in 2005, because it was too draining to the Israeli system. We spent 18 years in Lebanon. Nothing good came out of it. So how do you manage these two? So the solution is always in the details. The late Ariel Sharon always spoke about livable arrangements, which means a form of agreed upon non-belligerency, meaning you promise us that you will not try to kill us, and we will promise you we will not try to kill you. And then maximum self-rule to the Palestinians. While everyone agrees that it would be extremely irresponsible to let the Palestinians have an army at this point when Hamas is still around. It will be extremely irresponsible to let them have an air force. Can you imagine what they would have done to us with an air force? Or with an armored corps? Or with a navy, with submarines? All those things. By the way, that's one of the reasons Israel, the first thing we did after the Bashar al-Assad, after he fled to Moscow, Israel destroyed all the strategic assets of his army. Because we don't know who this al-Julani is. He's a former member of Al-Qaeda. Now he's going to have access to submarines. He's going to have access to firefighters, to airplanes. He was going to have access to... So Israel decided to destroy as many as we can, because you can't take the risk. So the same thing will happen with the Palestinians. So that form of self-rule will have to make sure that they don't have an army, that they do have a court system, meaning a legal system, an educational system under international supervision, so that they don't teach anti-Semitic texts from childhood, as they do right now. The external security will be guaranteed by other forces, and the checkpoints, the entry points, will be monitored also by other actors. So that will be, and other than that, they will have their own economy, their own currency, their own central bank, and so on and so forth. Very similar to what is happening nowadays in the West Bank in areas A. As you know, according to the Oslo Accords, that, believe it or not, are still in effect, the West Bank is divided into 3 areas, A, B, and C. Area A is under complete Palestinian control. Area B is joint control. The Palestinians control administratively, the Israelis control the security, and Area C is under Israeli control both administratively and security-wise. And so that's what's happening right now in the West Bank. So I would assume same thing could happen under certain circumstances also in Gaza. And don't forget, everybody's talking about the two-state solution. We are de facto looking at a three-state solution. Gaza and the West Bank are not going to be linked. And I think that one of the conclusions of 10-7 is that Israel has no interest in linking them because Gaza is far more radical religiously than the West Bank. So what's the point of allowing Gaza radicalism to infiltrate the West Bank? So I think it's not going to happen. But to answer your question, yes, I think that there is going to be some sort of a resolution, perhaps even under Trump. He already said he's favoring that. But it will not look like the relationship you have with Canada, or used to have with Canada. Because I'm not, who knows, maybe the United States is going to invade Canada soon. God, no, I have no idea. But you used to have good relationship with Canada. So, so it's not going to look like that. It's going to be very different, maybe more similar to the relationship the United States used to have with Cuba. You wanted to ask something, right? Oh, yes, over there. Yes, please. So, it's difficult to answer this question, what's going to happen with Iran, given the sudden change in the policy of the United States on the issue of Russia. But before that change, it was clear that the Russian-Chinese alliance is designed to challenge the United States and to challenge what we call American sphere of influence, meaning the countries that, like Israel, that are dependent upon the American system. And the conventional wisdom was that it was the interest of the United States and its allies to handle the Iranian challenge. Iran is a big part of the Chinese-Russian attempt to challenge American dominance. But now, I don't know what to say because the United States at least appears to be siding with Russia against Ukraine, so I don't know what to say. I can just say this. The debate between Israel and American administrations over Iran was on the issue of what's punishable. That was the question. Let me explain. So in order for your enemy to be successful, three preconditions have to exist. The first is your enemy has to be motivated to inflict harm on you. Your enemy has to have the means to attack you, and the enemy has to have the opportunity. Right? That's what happened on 9/11. Right? You had a highly motivated enemy. They weaponized, the airplanes became the weapons. And the opportunity was the fact that the airports were not secured properly. Now, when you look at different cultures, they differ on the emphasis their defense doctrine puts on each of the three. So in some cultures, the emphasis will be on the need to deprive the enemy of the opportunity to attack. So they say, yes, I know there are people who are highly motivated to inflict harm on my regime. I know that they even have the weapons, but my job is to deprive them of the opportunity. How do I do that? By making sure that I'm sending scores of law enforcement and Secret Service agents to the streets and to basically be present. And so the terrorists or the enemy know, oh my God, they're all over the place, I'm not going to do anything, right? How do we call that? Police states. That's a police state. Some cultures, like the American culture, need to put the emphasis on depriving the enemy of access to the weapons. Why? We call it, from a legal point of view, the smoking gun approach. I can't punish you for anything unless I find an object, the weapon. In your case, it's because of the Constitution. In other countries, other legal reasons, but by and large, it's the same. When you arrive at the airport, what do? They're looking through your bag. What are they looking for? An object. We call it a smoking gun. Without it, you can't do much in America. Israel is one of the few countries in the world that puts an emphasis on the motivation first. When you arrive at the Israeli airport, what do? First thing, they ask you 3 questions, right? They're silly questions. Who packed it, blah, blah, blah. What they're really interested is looking at your reaction. See if you're nervous or not. And then they decide how to take it further. Because 95% of the security screening is done before you even arrive at the airport. Why? Because our system is designed to identify motivation and to punish for motivation. We don't need you to have a weapon to be punished. The intent is enough for the Israelis to punish the enemy because of our history. And we know that when people say that they want to kill us, they actually mean it. It's not a joke. They try it, right? So that's the story. And that's the difference between the two approaches. So when you have a debate, now take those differences and apply them to the nuclear question. The United States policy was, under Obama, we can deliver an agreement that will prevent the Iranians from acquiring enough uranium to produce a bomb. And Israel said, yes, that's great, but it doesn't address the question of the motivation of the regime. This regime is talking openly about killing all the Jews. It's celebrating the Holocaust. Every year they have a Holocaust denial conference in Tehran. They're talking about those things openly. So what do you expect us to do? Today is nuclear. Tomorrow, God forbid, it's going to be biological. They can contaminate the Iranians. All the water resources in the Middle East. Then what? Millions of people can die. Then what? Then we will say, oh, thank God we prevented the nuclear bomb. Right? So Israel's argument, in my view, is very valid when you look at the Middle East and the history of the Middle East. You must be able. Intent is punishable in the Middle East. That's the huge cultural difference between Israel and the United States. And I don't know where Trump 47 stands on this issue, but definitely Trump 45 left the Iran agreement at the urging of Israel. I don't think it was a good decision, by the way. As a diplomat, I think you never voluntarily, give up on the seat you're given around the table. As a diplomat, I say that. Always maintain your seat. You have an opportunity to influence, use it. Don't give up. So I think from a diplomatic point of view, it was a big mistake. They should have influenced it, worked on it from within, change it. But maybe now, because Iran is so weak now, it's totally exposed, Israel destroyed its air defense systems, maybe Iran will be willing to sign a better deal. But again, to me, the problem is not the deal, the problem is what the regime stands for. That's what we should tackle. And I don't know if Trump 47 is willing to do that. We'll have to wait and see. What are the Palestinians like in Israel? I'm assuming you're referring to the Arab Israelis. So the Arab Israelis consist of nearly 20% of the Israeli population. And in the eyes of many people, surprisingly, they were very quiet after 10/7, not expressing their support for what happened. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that Hamas murdered also many Arab Israelis on 10/7. Arab Israelis that worked on that Shabbat in the music festival, they were the bus drivers, they were the cooks, they were the bartenders in the music festival and others. And so they killed many of them. And again, They uploaded it. Now, I want you to understand something. Even the Nazis did not upload images of what they did to the Jews. And in theory, they could have documented. They had cameras. They could have documented the gas chambers. They didn't. They logged everything. We found logs of everything. Everything was recorded. But they did not celebrate what they did to the Jews. To the point that when the war ended and the soldiers, Americans and Soviet soldiers and British soldiers entered the camps, but mostly American soldiers, they were so shocked at what they saw, that they saw the survivors, piles of dead bodies, piles of dead bodies. They reported back their findings. Eisenhower decided to immediately send photographers to the front lines. And his justification was, if we will not document what you guys are reporting, no one will believe us. They'll say it's a fabrication. And in fact, there's a movie, an HBO movie that came out exactly 10 years ago. I think it's called Night Will Fall. I think that's the name. I urge all of you to watch it. It's a documentary about the effort that the Allied forces made to document the liberation of the camps with photographers. And it's about how the great Alfred Hitchcock was called from Hollywood in June of 1945 back to London to edit all the footage. And the idea was to have Hitchcock produce a documentary about the atrocities. Not only that, Eisenhower instructed them to document the liberation, they also, in places where the death camps were near German or Polish villages, they would take the villagers. They didn't tell them what was the purpose of it, but on a Sunday morning, they told them that they were going to take them someplace and that they have to dress nicely. And you see the women and the children are dressed as if they're prepared to go to church. And the troops took them to the camps to see the villagers. Don't say you did not know. Now you know. Don't say you did not know whether the smoke, what's the reason for that smoke, or the ashes. Don't say you had no idea. Now they took them and they documented. You have to see this documentary to understand. Now, I'm mentioning this documentary because of what Hamas did on 10/7. So imagine that Hamas did exactly the opposite of what the Nazis tried to do. They celebrated their barbaric behavior, their pre-civilizational behavior, thus shocking the whole world, including the Muslim world. And that's the answer to your question. And as I mentioned before, they're not doing such a great job because, after all, they have no allies, the Palestinians, other than some morons here at Columbia University. But they really have no allies. Not in the Arab world, not in the Muslim world, not in the Western world. And all the rest is just noise. Noise that doesn't change the big picture. And on this happy note, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. And see you again in a few weeks. God bless you. Bye-bye.